Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the difference between financial abuse and economic abuse. I know probably when the webinar was advertised, the title was Understanding and Surviving Financial Abuse. And financial abuse and economic abuse are very much linked, but are two different things, and we'll be speaking about that in a couple of minutes. And understanding economic abuse in the context of domestic abuse in general, and talking about the abusers or perpetrators, as we sometimes call them, what they do, their strategies and their patterns of behaviour. And we don't just want to talk about the problems, we want to also talk about solutions for women. So finding ways to create economic safety, and I'll be talking about what I mean by economic safety and well-being later on. And I just want to make a note here about language. When I find that when I'm speaking, when I refer to a survivor of abuse, sometimes we try to use the term victim survivor to express that, you know, sometimes when the word victim can seem overly negative, it's not really acknowledging the strength and the resilience of a lot of the women that we work with. So we try to use the term victim survivor, double barrel. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we think it expresses much better the experiences of the women we work with. As well, when we're referring to victim survivors, we use the word she. Referring to perpetrators, we use the word he. And that is not to say that men can't be victims and women can't be abusers. We know that they can, but the vast majority of people we work with are women. The majority of the people we support, and we know that economic abuse affects women in a much more severe way than it affects men. And we'll be talking about the gendered nature of this type of abuse in a couple of slides' time. So, but that's often something that we're questioned about and is discussed. So that's something I thought I'd bring up right at the start. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and go back to the chat just to check to see if there's if anybody wants to send me a message to suggest something that they'd like to be discussed today that isn't in the learning outcomes, just so I have it in mind when we're speaking. So it's so I try to address what everybody is interested in hearing about. If not, if anything comes up which I don't address today, or you've got questions about, there'll be time at the end to ask questions via the chat. We have got 2 hours booked. The slideshow usually lasts about an hour to an hour and a half, and we'll have a break in the middle, and then we'll have about half an hour at the end for questions and answers. So bear with me a second. Okay. Any questions so far? If not, that's fine. If you do have any questions and you'd like to, or there's anything you'd like me to address, please just send me a message now in the group chat. And I just want to say as well, with the group chat, I've made it so you can only speak to myself, to the host, just so sometimes in webinars people will accidentally write something that's maybe a bit sensitive or personal and share it with the whole group. So I've disabled that, so that isn't something that you need to worry about. Yeah, somebody's mentioned as well getting out of debt at the end of a relationship. My job title actually is a domestic violence debt advocate, and the majority of the work I do is working with women who are in debt because of an abuser, because of a relationship, or the after effects of that. So that's something that we will mention. Building as well, building confidence and self-esteem. It's more sort of about it's very much today sort of focused on the economic well-being and financial well-being, which is very much linked with confidence and self-esteem. But I'll be sharing the stories of some survivors of economic abuse who work with us, and how they've managed to move forward in a material, practical way, addressing their debts, but also in building their confidence and and moving forward emotionally as well. So yeah, that's something we can address. And I just want to say, if it's a large topic, it's something that we could, we could do a week-long course about. It's sometimes it's difficult to address everything, but if there's something that occurs to you afterwards that hasn't been addressed, then perhaps you could get in touch with the Women's Trust, and they could get in touch with me, and we can, and I can forward information on. I can forward information on that way. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, I'll go back to screen share, and I will just keep checking the group chat periodically. Okay, so I know that you may have already attended webinars or courses, or done your own research or understanding about what domestic abuse is. But I think it's useful to go back to basics sometimes and start with the statutory definition. As you might know, there's a draft bill going through Parliament at the moment with a new, more complex definition of domestic abuse. It's had a bit of an interesting journey. It started last year, but what with Brexit and then the coronavirus lockdown, the progress of this bill has been delayed several times. But we are hoping to see progress on this. And the new definition are as follows. Domestic abuse is behaviour by person A towards person B. Is domestic abuse if A and B are aged 16 or over and are personally connected, and the behaviour is abusive. So 16 or over, anything under 60, anything involving an individual under 16 would be regarded as child abuse rather than domestic abuse, although obviously those things are very much linked. Personally connected, we're going to look at what that means in a second, but the behaviour is abusive if it consists of any of the following. So obviously the things that things that are more commonly thought of in terms of domestic abuse: physical and sexual abuse, violent or threatening behaviour, controlling or coercive behaviour, which is now a criminal offence in itself, obviously, economic abuse, which is our focus, and psychological, emotional or other abuse. So economic abuse, we are happy to see that there, because this is one of the first times that economic abuse has been recognised as and named at a statutory level. You might have found in the past, and we certainly have, that when professionals and the public at large were thinking about domestic abuse and domestic violence, the economic, financial side of things was often ignored. It was often a bit of an afterthought. Sometimes when women were going to services like Refuge or Women's Aid or wherever, they were asked right at the end, "Oh, what about the money? Does he control the money?" Or women who had lost quite a lot, financially, materially, were sometimes told, "Well, what's important is that you've got your health, you've got your freedom." But what we really see and what we try to stress is that to have health and to have freedom and to have safety, you need to have access to your economic, financial, material resources, which is why economic abuse is as important and as harmful as any of the other things in this list. You may well have seen this wheel before. It's something that's been around for quite a long time now. It's a bit of a veteran on the scene. It's the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, I think from the 70s or the 80s, America, where they first produced this of understanding this model of what domestic abuse is. And so what was revolutionary about it was that it recognises that at the heart of this type of behaviour by perpetrators is power and control. It very much, the aim of it, whatever type of behaviour it is, is for the abuser to have power and control over the survivor, the victim survivor. And economic abuse, as you see, that segment has always been there, preventing her from getting or keeping a job, making her ask for money, giving her allowance, taking her money. It's always been there. Yeah, it's just hasn't really been at the forefront, really. And we know that physical violence, sexual violence it might not always be present, it might be threatened, but it often is always the threat which backs up all those other types of control and behaviour. And just going back to the definition here. So when we say when A and B are aged 16 or over and are personally connected, by personally connected, we mean husband, wife, partners, same-sex partners, boyfriend, girlfriend, partners, spouses, but also other family members, such as the relationships as between adult children and parents. And we see economic abuse taking place often in my work, certainly, where an abuser has been removed from the property because his wife or partner has sought help. Often will go home, live with his mother or adult parents and continue to be abusive, especially economically abusive. But at this point, the target has changed. It's the parents rather than the partner who's being victimized. And also sort of brother-sister relationships, siblings. Sometimes, especially in cases of honour-based violence, sometimes the whole it can be a whole family circle who are practicing this type of abuse. Okay, bear with me a second. I'm just going to check the chat. So I've just had a question about why perpetrators, as I understand, so why perpetrators like to power and control, why that is their aim. It's difficult to say. There's a lot of different studies there's a whole discipline which looks at why perpetrators do what they do, why abusers abuse, why they feel the need or the sense of entitlement, or why they feel that they're allowed to practice this type of behaviour to try and get control over another human being. Really, it goes beyond what my speciality, definitely, but there are some interesting studies that I can signpost you to perhaps at the end. There's an organisation called Respect, which works with male victims of domestic abuse and also perpetrators of both sexes, and they are the experts really in working out what the motivations are behind the behaviour, and to hopefully teach them different ways of relating and to stop that behaviour from happening in the first place. There was also a study by Durham University called the Mirabelle Project that looked at why, and at the heart of it, it seems there's often a sense of grievance by abusers, a sense of entitlement that they're the ones who are the victim, in fact, and it is their right to control and to have that power and to act in this way. But it goes beyond really what I can speak about with confidence. It's a whole, there's a whole study, but see, that is a very good question. So just coming to the definition of economic abuse is, so it's defined as any behaviour that has a substantial and adverse effect on B, and if you remember, B is referring to the the victim of survivor of the abuse to acquire, use or maintain money or other property or obtain goods or services. So property and goods or services includes things such as a mobile phone or a car, and for example, utilities such as heating, or items such as food or clothing. And we're going to look at some examples of that in a second. Okay. And who is at risk? So what we know is that perpetrators of abuse will exploit existing inequality, or they will create it. Often I know when I speak about my work outside of work, often the response from family and friends will get is that, oh, well, a certain type of person is a victim, somebody who is maybe not good with money or is not chaotic, or to some degree chooses to be in this type of situation, which, as we know, is absolutely not the case. Absolutely anyone is at risk. And the women who we work with, the women who volunteer for us at Surviving Economic Abuse, come from all backgrounds, all different types of career, different age groups as well. And what they have in common is that they have been in contact with a perpetrator, usually an intimate partner, who has created dependency with them or has created economic instability. But when there's already economic inequality or disadvantage, perpetrators will exploit that. So women are at increased risk, as are disabled people of both sexes and gay men, I find. So I find, especially when it comes to disabled people, often we find perpetrators can be posing as a carer, or force some survivors to commit benefit fraud. They might be relying on the perpetrator for communication or mobility in these cases. Women are at greater risk, often because they are at a financial disadvantage already in earning less than men, in being dependent on the male provider after having children, for example. With gay men, we know that often there's the fear of experiencing discrimination if they report, and the fear of being shamed and being outed by a partner. And as I mentioned before, this definition, it covers abuse by intimate partners as well as family members, such as sibling, adolescent parent violence, or elder abuse. Elder abuse is quite common. Okay, I'm just going to pause at this slide for a second. Go back to the chat. So, as I mentioned, there's a difference between economic abuse and financial abuse. Would anybody like to volunteer in the chat what they think that difference might be? Just if you know, to tell me, or if you want to have a guess. Okay, well, we'll look at it on the. Yeah, so somebody's wrote economic abuse is broader. Yeah, absolutely. So financial abuse is very is about a very particular area of economic resources. Also said one is about money. Someone says differences. One is money and one is material. Yeah, right. And financial is more about money, and economic is more possessions and lifestyle. Yeah, so that is broadly it. So bear with me a second. I'll show you how we define the difference. So they are used interchangeably, but it's important to recognise that there is a difference. So, as you've recognised, economic abuse is more than just, in inverted commas, exerting controls through money and finances, but it's also about the wider resources such as housing, transport, food, clothing, etc. So you could say financial abuse is a subcategory of economic abuse, whereas the financial is about, just said, about money. So financial abuse could be interfering with someone's bank account or taking the cash out of their purse, but economic abuse is restricting access to housing, to transport, to food, for clothing, to anything that you could think of, really. It's important that we, often when we're speaking to professionals, I will be quite pedantic and annoying, really, and correct them, because it's important that we use the term economic rather than financial. The reason being is, if we think about abuse as just financial, then it's not recognising a lot of the behaviours of perpetrators. Because sometimes when I used to work for Women's Aid and for the domestic abuse charities, and we would ask women, have you been experiencing economic abuse? Sometimes women would say, no, because he never restricted access to, he never took my money, he never took my bank card. However, if we're thinking about economic abuse as a whole, there's all sorts of other things that a perpetrator might be restricting access to food, for example, to the house keys, to things that we need to live our daily lives, such as toiletries, such as glasses, for example. That's why the financial part, the money, is just a subcategory. So one of the things we do when we work with other professionals, as part of my role is also to do workshops with women, but also with professionals who are in a position to change their response to economic abuse and to help, is trying to develop empathy, to help them understand that it's not just about money. It's not something that you can respond to by saying, well, money's not important, at least you've got your health, at least you've got your safety. It's a lot more complex and deep-rooted than that. And what we ask often is, what would you do if, for whatever reason, you didn't have access to some things that you might take for granted if you've never experienced economic abuse before? So basic things such as, in this picture, there's shampoo, sanitary products, toilet roll, water. This is this looks like a scarf, but it's actually a blanket. If you had to leave the house today, if you had to come to work or to study without these things, how would your day have been? How would you have felt if you couldn't use toilet paper, you couldn't have a drink of water in the morning, you couldn't wash your hair, or you had to try to sleep without adequate warmth and comfort? And most people will respond after thinking about it, I wouldn't have come to work, or I couldn't have come to work. And the next screen, sort of like the second tier, really, if as well as those things you didn't have access to these, so your cash, your card, now card more and more than cash, your car keys. And often when we do this session with young people, this is often when they burst out laughing at the very old-fashioned looking phone. But a phone, whatever it looks like, is a lifeline. And if you'd been deprived of these things, would you even got this far today? Would you've been able to come to your job in the bank or the police station or the estate agency, the council's offices? And often the response is no. I wouldn't have come in. I would have called in sick. I would have made excuses. Or some people say I would have asked a friend for help, but often it's very difficult, as we know, for people experiencing this, to say, can you, I haven't been able to wash my hair today, can I use your shower, can I borrow your deodorant, can I borrow £10 to get home? This is a very difficult conversation to have, and perpetrators are very much aware of that. So on this last, the last section, these are sort of the things that you might not need every day, but we tend to rely on. So at the top as certificate of achievement. So we know perpetrators of abuse will often hide or destroy things, that documents that can help us live our lives, such as qualifications, your degree, or some work training that you've done, your DBS certificate, letters, council tax bills, proof of address, your CV, and an ID, especially ID such as your passport, driving license. And these are the things. Without these things, you can feel invisible, or you can look invisible as well. And we know that when women come to be rehoused or to go into refuge, if a perpetrator has kept these type of documents from them, it's very difficult to do anything, to claim benefits, to claim housing benefit, to claim universal credit or whatever. So often, once we've showed these things, which are all economic resources and which can easily be restricted from by a perpetrator, often the conclusion is by the professionals that I would lose my job eventually. I wouldn't be able to work. It's so you could define economic abuse. So financial abuse is sort of taking or restricting access to money. Economic abuse is restricting your ability to make money in the first place, to go to work, to access your bank account. Okay, and I don't know if anyone has seen this this picture before. This is another sort of old diagram that it comes in and out of fashion, really. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the basic. Some people don't believe it's too simplistic, but it very much it rings true with my experience of professional experience at surviving economic abuse, because the idea what the hierarchy, the pyramid is expressing, is that when your basic physiological needs aren't met, like having food, having water, having being able to go to the toilet, for example, only restrict. And if you don't feel that you're safe, that you have access to your resources, to your bodily health, then you can't really focus on the things that are higher up the pyramid. Your respect for yourself and others, your self-esteem, your confidence, and those things right at the top, such as creativity, pushing yourself forward, actualizing your goals. And this is why some of the women who come to us often say that they feel as though they've lost themselves. Really, they've lost that connection to the person who they were before the relationship. And sometimes this can be quite a helpful way of seeing that it's not it's not something that has just happened. It's been the result of deliberate behaviour by a perpetrator. And we find this as well as quite useful when we're speaking with professionals such as social workers, for example, say, or job coaches, that it's very difficult to expect a survivor to meet the goals that they've been set by professionals when they haven't had access to the very basic things that you need as a human being to survive. Bear with me a second. I'm just going to go to the chat just to check there's no questions. Okay, that's fine. So we think it is actually very important to look at perpetrator behaviour. See, the work we do is very much focused on the women, sort of empowering the survivors, helping them get to a point where they've got some economic safety and stability in their lives. But I think it's also important to look at the tactics and the behavioural patterns of perpetrators, for the simple reason that often women will blame themselves. If at the end of the relationship they have a lot of debt, for example, or they have issues with the bank or a period of unemployment, often they will blame themselves, and they may at some point have taken on some things that the perpetrator has said to them, continuously said to them, such as, you're bad with money, you can't save, you can't work, you won't get a job because you're stupid, that sort of thing. Things which are absolutely not true, but because of the sort of the psychological abuse and the manipulation that perpetrators will employ, after a while they will start to believe, because anybody will believe that after they've been told it a certain amount of time. So some of the work we do is looking at the behaviour of the perpetrator and showing how their behaviour has led to the women being in this position where they're in debt, or where they have very little income, or where they have problems with the bank, or where they've had to go bankrupt. It's not because of their own failings. It's definitely not because they're bad with money. It's because of what the perpetrator has done. And we find that the tactics fall under three categories, really. So restriction, so restricting access to resources, to money or other economic resources, exploiting them, and sabotaging them. So I'm going to show some examples now. So obviously a few minutes ago we looked at the Duluth power and control wheel. So Nicola Sharp, who is our director at sea, developed a wheel which is specifically about economic power and control. Because when you control someone's money, economic resources, you have the capacity to control every aspect of their lives. And see, this is a resource that we can forward around. I can send afterwards. But just looking at some examples here. The emotional abuse in particular is so making women account for every penny, making her feel that she's worth less by denying her basic necessities. So often some of the women we work with have been given a shopping list, and they've had to only buy the things that were on the list and account for any extra penny that they spent. And the message there is that that you don't know how to manage money. I do. Sometimes some women have been forced to buy things that are of lower quality, that are cheaper, whereas the perpetrator has the more expensive branded items and food, and it's all to give this impression that he is worth more, and she and the children sometimes are worth less. And isolation in particular, not giving her any money to go anywhere or do anything. So the friends or the family members who we might ask for help, are very difficult to contact. Said, if you don't have a phone, if you don't have money to go for coffee, if you can't, if you can't drive somewhere. And touching on what somebody asked me before about using male privilege, often we find that, supposedly we have equality now, but male privilege is still very much a factor in many women's lives. And the answer to why perpetrators like to use power and control, often it's with a sense of entitlement that by being male they have the right to, because they are head of the household. They see it as their job to make the decisions about financial issues, and defining who works, who doesn't, who is in charge of the money, who isn't. And I'd just like to point out here that sometimes in some households and some relationships, it might be quite normal for one person to be in charge of the bank accounts, for example, in charge of the budget, and another person to take care of the say the children and the housework. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily wrong to have a division of labour that way, but it's when it's enforced. I mean, my last job, I worked with Syrian families who were being resettled in the UK, and very often it was one either the husband or the wife would control the money, the other person would look after the family. Usually be the woman looking after the family. And that isn't necessarily a negative thing in itself, but it's where it is abusive, where it's not open for discussion. The woman isn't allowed to question that, or the man isn't allowed to question that, or else there's the threat of violence or intimidation or humiliation. So some more examples of perpetrator behaviour with me. So preventing a woman from attending school, college or university, forbidden employment, taking the pay, refusing to let her claim benefits, and not letting her have access to a bank account, or not letting her apply for credit. We're going to be speaking about coerced debt in a minute, so that would be forcing the survivor to apply for credit. But on the flip side of that is that, as you might know, if you've never applied for any type of loan, you can be what is known as credit invisible, which means that in the future, if you try to get a mortgage or even a mobile phone contract, and there's no record of you ever having any type of credit agreement, it can be very difficult, to do that. And some perpetrators are well aware of this. So preventing the use of economic resources. So controlling when and how the money is spent. So providing an allowance, dictating what should be bought, checking receipts, making them, the women keep a spending diary, and making them justify every purchase. And controlling the use of property such as phone or vehicle. So phones and cars and the car keys are what perpetrators often will focus on straight away, because these things are a lifeline really to the outside world. If you have a phone, you have the ability to seek help. However difficult it is to make the step, that there is at least that line to the outside world. A vehicle obviously is a means of leaving the situation. Often we find women, they might have access to the vehicle, but the perpetrator will often hide the car keys or withhold money for petrol, for example, because he knows that is her lifeline to the outside world. And something that is a huge red flag, say at the beginning of a relationship, is when an abuser starts to insist that all the assets are in his name. So the house, for example, the tenancy agreement, the car, whereas all the risks, sort of the bills and the debts, are in the survivor's name. And controlling the ability to obtain economic resources. So preventing, I think we've had this one. And the other one is coerced debt. And I know someone mentioned debt at the beginning. My role as a debt advisor means that this is something that I come across on a daily basis. So this is where the victim survivor is told or forced to make financial transactions where there are negative consequences for non-compliance. So, for example, she might be made to have responsibility for the mortgage, for a household bill, or she might be forced to take out a credit card or a loan, or a store card. Even car finance is quite common, and they could be physical, the threat of physical violence if she doesn't, but often it is emotional blackmail, or sometimes it's indirect, like a couple of older women in particular I work with, because their husbands weren't allowing them to have access to their money, to their pension, as it were, and their savings. The only way that they could buy themselves clothes or presents for the grandchildren was taking out catalogue debt. So we would call this coerced debt, even though he didn't directly force her to, but indirectly, by restricting her access to her own money, she was in a position where that was the only way she could buy things that would give her a basic quality of life. And also, beyond just forcing her to take out the debt. Often we see abusers will sometimes hide letters that come from the creditors, or when they know that a payment is due, they will take money from the bank, so she's not able to pay on time, which will lead her to get into more debt and then become more dependent on him as a result. And looking at the effects of the effects of economic abuse. So what we find is that it limits women, bear with me, it limits women's choices and their ability to access safety. And this is one of the reasons we are so passionate about it, about this type of abuse and combating it, because it's about the lost opportunities that happen in women's lives because of this type of behaviour. The sort of the exploitation, the control, sabotaging resources and money. So women who were or could have been sort of independent, safe, with a career, with study, perpetrators have created a situation where they're dependent either on him or on someone else, or where they're unstable. And often the women will be blamed for that. They'll be seen as somebody who can't manage money, who has problem debts, even though it's through no fault of their own. And this results in barriers to leaving. So staying in a relationship longer than she would want to, because she literally doesn't have the resources to leave and to go somewhere else. Being subjected to physical harm, because see, the longer the relationship goes on, generally the more abusive, the more dangerous the perpetrator will get, living in poverty, and the loss of potential. And one thing we find quite upsetting is that sometimes the women will come to us and say that there were a lot of things that the plans that they had in their lives, but that they weren't able to fulfill, because of the behaviour of the perpetrator. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. I think it is. I think we've been talking for roughly an hour. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. I think the next part of the webinar really is more talking about. I've talked a lot about setting the scene, about what abuse is and what it does, but we also want to talk about solutions as well, about ways to recover from, ways to move on and to rebuild after experiencing domestic abuse, which is what the next half of the webinar is focusing on. So I think this would be a good time to have a break. So it's 5 to 11 now. How about we come back at 10 past 11, and then we'll start on the second half. If everybody's okay with that, I'll stop the presentation until 5 past 11. But if anybody's got any questions, please just I'm on the chat now, so feel free to send me a message. Okay, thanks for waiting. I'll get all that sorted. So I was asked to share the last slide again, which is this one. At the end, if there's any slides that anyone's missed or you want me to go back to any other ones, then just feel free to let me know. So this is about the effects of economic abuse, and we have this on our website as well. So this little diagram is aiming to show how economic abuse in intimate partner relationships, the kind of behaviour it involves. So exploitation of the woman's money and other resources, controlling her life and her resources, sabotaging the resources sometimes. Example of sabotaging is sometimes abusers destroying property, just destroying money. We find it's often the case when it comes to property. Say a woman and her ex-partner have a house that they're trying to sell. Often ex-partners, abusers, will sabotage the sale of the house by damaging the property or not cooperating. So all of this sort of chipping away at the economic resources she has, which we're talking about economic resources. I mean, we have her money and her possessions, her access to funds, and this leads or can lead to dependence and or instability. So often dependence on the perpetrator, because she's been unable to access her own resources or earn her own money because of his behaviour, so becomes dependent on him. A classic example of this is women who have careers, have a job, but because the perpetrator continually makes it difficult for her to go into work, by taking the car keys, by hiding her shoes sometimes, by not allowing her to have access to basic things such as soap, deodorant, or harassing her at work, so she ends up having disciplinaries, having to leave, not helping with childcare. Often that leads to loss of employment, which makes her dependent on either on the perpetrator or on the state, for example, or on friends and family, which forcing her into debt causes financial instability. And the end result, without support, can be that she doesn't leave, because perhaps renting a property on her own is going to be very difficult, because her credit rating has been damaged by the perpetrator's behaviour. Perhaps going into emergency accommodation is difficult because he's hidden her documents. Physical harm, because the longer we're in the presence of somebody who was violent, who was physically dangerous, just by basic probability, the more likely they are to harm us. And we know that abusive behaviour tends to get worse rather than better as time goes on. And to poverty and loss of potential, times even or delayed potential, because the plans and the dreams that we have are often have to be put on hold or put to one side because of the perpetrator's behaviour. Bear with me a second while I check the chat to see if anybody's got any questions. Okay, thank you. So this section, I'm going to go through some of the practical things that we can do to avoid further harm and to help sort of repair and rebuild after experiencing this type of harm. And I want to stress as well that there is only so much you can do really to protect yourself from abuse in the future. And I say that because often there's an assumption among perhaps people who haven't experienced this situation, so don't understand that it happens because of mistakes made on the woman's behalf, on the woman's part. I mean, that she didn't read the signs, or she made some bad decisions with money, but it's not the case. The women we work with are doing what we all do, what everybody does really. Meeting a partner, perhaps getting married, having a joint bank account, buying a house, getting credit, getting a mortgage, very, very ordinary things that we're encouraged to do, but with the perpetrator of abuse, who can be very, very manipulative and very underhand, can result in her becoming dependent, getting in debt, losing money, having a security compromise. So I just want to point out that we're not, that there's no way of perpetrator proofing our lives, but there are certain things that we can do to make us a bit safer, to make it more difficult for them. And when it comes to rebuilding after the relationship, debt is an issue. And I know one of you's already spoken to me about debt, that hangs over you after the relationship ends, or even during the relationship. And at the end, I'm going to show the number for our financial support line. There's a few different organisations you can contact to help, which I'll list here, but I've got in red at the top the financial support line that we run, which can advise around debt, in particular coerced debt. But so it doesn't have to be with us, it can be other debt advisors. Getting help from a debt or money advisor to find out what you to look at what you owe, how you came to have that debt in the first place, and looking at the best way of managing that. Occasionally, when it's coerced debt, and we have enough evidence, and just speaking as a debt advisor, sometimes we can challenge it. We can show that the woman has not benefited from that debt, and she was forced into taking it out by the perpetrator, and it's him who should be repaying it, not her. There. Other times we can advise on other solutions, on other ways of dealing with the debt or insolvency, but each case is different, which is why if you're struggling at all with debt payments, or you have debts which you don't think you should have because you were forced into taking them, then I would make an appointment as soon as you can with a debt or money advisor. The financial support line we run is a partnership between C and a Money Advice Plus. We specialise in supporting women in this situation who've suffered economic abuse and have debt as a result. So I would recommend you contact support line as the first port of call, because we know why you call them, basically, in that we know that the women who come to us will have experienced abuse, whereas the other services are very good but are generic. And bear in mind, at the end, I'm going to put the contact details for all of these organisations. So registering with CFAS, I don't know, bear with me. I don't know if it's, apologies everyone, the slides keep jumping about, but I don't know if CFAS is an organisation that you've heard of, but it stands for Credit Industry Fraud Action Scheme, and this is it's an organisation that you pay to you pay to register with. It's a quite small one-off fee, I think £25, and extra security is put on your account. So this means that whenever you try to take out a loan or any type of credit agreement, such as a long-term mobile phone contract or a credit card or a store card, it means that when the firm applies for that loan, they have to take on extra. They have to do extra checks to make sure that it is you who is making that application, not somebody who is using your identity, because we know that perpetrators will often use the identity of the women, of the victim survivors, even after the relationship ends. Somebody you were married to or in a relationship to, they're likely to know your personal details, your date of birth, your mother's maiden name, what you might use as a password. So it's possible that they might try and commit identity fraud, and identity fraud is something that happens outside of relationships as well. So registering with an organisation like this puts that extra layer of security there. And reporting to the police. So economic abuse is not a crime in itself, but see, a lot of the things that happen within economic abuse are crimes. So, for example, coercive and controlling behaviour since 2015 is a criminal offence, and in many of the cases that we work with, as well as being economically abusive, the perpetrators are practicing coercive controlling behaviour. Often it's theft, destruction of property, living off the proceeds of crime as well. Modern Slavery Act, these are all crimes that perpetrators commit. Problem that we've had in the past is that the police didn't recognise it. Imagine, so an older couple, for example, that we worked with, the woman was suffering abuse from her husband. So she called the police and told them, my husband's broken my glasses. It wasn't taken seriously. They didn't ask any further questions. But when she went back to the police with an advocate and explained that, yes, her husband broke her glasses, every time she gets a new pair of glasses, he breaks them because he doesn't want her to go out of the house. And without her glasses, she can't see. He also hides her walking stick and her medication, and he's controlling both of their pensions. So when it was presented as sort of as a wider problem, not just a specific incident, often that's when they can take action. And on our website on C, we've got advice on when you can report to the police and how to and how the best way to do that with an advocate. I think there's a question in the chat box, so bear with me. I'm just gonna have a look. Yeah, so somebody has asked me if it's financial abuse when it's the perpetrator's money who's being wasted, but who is so it's a perpetrator who was in debt, as I understand, significant debt, but in his name, but is claiming that it's claiming that it's a debt of the woman, that that's her fault, that's a matrimonial debt. Okay. So I would very much call that financial abuse and economic abuse, and it sounds like it's the emotional abuse is there too, because he's trying to make it seem as if it's it's the woman's fault really, when it's actually his. And often women will get into debt or will repay money that they shouldn't be repaying because they've been forced to feel by the perpetrator that it is their responsibility. So for the woman who asked me that question, I think it would be difficult to give like concrete advice right now without knowing the full ins and outs. But it sounds as though it might not be a debt that she's liable for. So I would recommend contacting our support line and discussing that, and discussing what the what the best outcomes are, what the best course of actions are. But often we find, and I think it may be one of these situations where perpetrators will tell the women that they owe money that they don't. A classic example is the so-called joint credit card. Some women who call us say, we've got a joint credit card and he's run up this debt, and it's and I'm liable for it. But in this country, there is actually no such thing as a joint credit card. You can add somebody's name to it as an additional card holder, but there's only one actual card holder, or main card holder, and they're the ones who are responsible. And it sounds as though it may be a situation like that, because generally if a debt isn't in your name, then you're not responsible for it. But obviously perpetrators can often make us believe that the opposite is true. So as well, contacting the bank. Often the banks are key to helping women, or to, unfortunately, it's happened in the past, or to not helping. A classic problem that we face is joint bank accounts. After a relationship ended, the last remaining link can be a joint bank account. And in the past, the banks were saying, well, the only way to close this account is for both account holders to come into branch and to sign. And obviously, in the best of situations at the end of a relationship, even when there isn't abuse, that's not something that you want to be doing. At worst, it can be very it could be very dangerous. it could be very dangerous. So the what the banks are doing now, and we have another resource on our website on how to on how to speak to the bank and the best ways that they can help. You know, they've agreed to say, well, in cases of financial abuse, you know, they will close a bank account or they will freeze it without the permission of both parties. And I'm just going to skip across to a few slides. So I don't know if anybody's sort of aware of this, but it's called the Financial Abuse Code of Practice. So this is a document that most of the high street banks and building societies signed, and they agreed in it that they were going to recognise the problem of financial abuse, and they were going to support customers who were experiencing this. And they recognise as well that it's primarily women. So they've agreed to raise awareness and to train their staff. So hopefully when women go to the bank and explain what has been happening to them, they're not fobbed off, they're not turned away, they're offered a private room to speak in. So I know where I grew up, for example, if you spoke in the bank about something, everybody in the queue would know about it, and then everybody in the village would know about by lunchtime. So they're now understanding that it's not something that is safe to talk about in public, and they're agreeing to offer private rooms. And as well, most banks have a vulnerable customer team as well, though they might call it by different names, which in some banks in particular, such as NatWest and Lloyds, have a specialist team for women with who suffer from financial abuse. And if anybody has issues with their bank that they're finding difficult to resolve, then I'd recommend as well giving us a call by the support line, which is at the end, and we'll see if there's a team that we can refer you into in the bank. Not all banks are as good as others, but some of them, Lloyds in particular, NatWest, are quite, have specialist teams. They've also agreed to keep disclosures of financial abuse on record, so women don't have to repeat the same story over and over again, and to different every time they go into the bank or phone them, which can be very exhausting and traumatic. And what's perhaps most useful is that they agreed that they'll help women close joint bank accounts when it's with an abuser without requesting the abuser's permission. They'll put extra security on the account so information doesn't get sent to the perpetrator, because that's been an issue in the past, that women have left and the bank the bank statements have been sent back to his house, and he's been able to see from that everywhere she's been using her card, making transactions, and pinpoint her location. One thing that they've offered now is non-geographical sort codes, that they'll help women open new bank accounts, and with a sort code which doesn't show your location, because a lot of sort codes, I don't know if you've ever Googled your sort code, but sometimes it'll show you where you opened the account. So if you have to give your sort code to your ex-partner, for example, to pay child maintenance, obviously that's a way of getting your location. So they're recognising now that that's a problem. And they're also agreeing that they will help women who don't have ID, because often they've had to flee without the usual ID you would need to open an account, and who don't have a fixed address. So that's a sort of a big step forward. Actually, I'm just going to check the chat box a second, because I think I saw a question pop up. Yeah, I know. A couple of people have said that they have contacted they've contacted support lines and solicitors in the past and been told there's nothing that can be done really, and what the perpetrator is saying is correct. It's difficult to say for certain whether that's right or not, but I would definitely, what I'll do, I'll share our number at the end, and I'd recommend giving us a call to talk it through, just to check that is the case, definitely. It very much depends on a lot of different factors in the situation. So it's hard for me to say one way or the other. But I would recommend calling us, because sometimes when you're told a certain thing by an advisor, at a generic organisation, it might be that they weren't taking into account the fact that there was abuse and coercion, and that could perhaps change, or should have changed, the response they gave you. So I can't guarantee that the advisor you spoke to wasn't correct when they said that there's nothing that can be done, but I think it is definitely worth getting a second or third opinion, as it might be. Okay. So the document, if you Google New Financial Abuse Code of Practice, that's a useful one to have if you're having issues with the bank as well, because it sets out what they should be doing to help customers. Okay. If they're not, if they're not abiding by that, we would advise making a complaint to the Financial Ombudsman Service. That's often a way of making change happen, and as well the Communication Ombudsman. And this is where a situation we have quite often, where women have a mobile phone contract in their name which the perpetrator is using because he's stolen, or he's taken, or he forced her to take out in the first place. And this comes up again and again and again, and it means that women are stuck sometimes in a 24-month contract, paying for an expensive phone and usage that they don't have any access to. And sometimes when you speak to the telephone companies, they will be understanding and release the woman from the contract. Sometimes they won't, and they won't release her, and then if she doesn't pay, they'll pursue the debt. If after having the situation explained to them about the abuse, they're still not cooperating, I would recommend escalating a complaint to the Communication Ombudsman Service, because that can sometimes change the outcome. Okay, so often at the end of a relationship with an abuser, we very much find ourselves at a disadvantage, because the money that we could have been saving or spending or earning, we haven't been able to, because of the perpetrator's behaviour. And a part of one step in the way of recovering from that is maximising income as much as possible, and making sure that you say, if you're claiming benefits, or even if you're working, there are a lot of pots of money out there that people aren't aware of necessarily. There was a statistic I read by Citizens Advice that something like 40% of the population could be getting a benefit that they're entitled to, but they're not aware of, which is astounding when you think of the amount of financial help that could that could give someone that they're entitled to. And I would recommend, just as a first port of call, doing a benefit check on his website, Turn to Us, Entitled to, Citizens Advice. They will ask you about your situation, your housing, whether you're working, if you're supporting anyone, if you're a carer, how many hours you're working, any issues with disability or ill health. And then you may find that you're entitled to claim for something that you weren't necessarily aware of. And another interesting source of support are benevolent funds and grants. I mean, there are funds there that people aren't necessarily aware of, and the website I mentioned above, Turn to Us, has a very good grant finder section. There's the website's in two halves. The first is about benefits. The second is about finding grants. And this there's pots of money available for women, for example, who are setting up a new home after leaving, or have children, or have specific disabilities. Or at the moment, I've signposted a few women who were working in the sort of catering, hospitality industries, and were furloughed or made redundant because of COVID-19. There's the Retail Trust and the Hospitality Trust have made some money available for people in this situation. There was another woman who had kidney disease, still does, and is applied for a grant with the National Kidney Foundation for some new furniture, and this was after moving and after fleeing abuse. So it's not a life-changing amount. It can be like a couple of £100 sometimes, or more or less, but it can help if you're setting up new, or you've had a change in circumstances that's put you at a disadvantage. These are things that could just help to just a bit of a boost over a difficult time. And with the utility arrears, we find perpetrators will often deliberately run up debts with water, with electricity, with gas, after putting the account in the woman's name. And some women, they don't have any other kind of debt, but they might owe £2,000 perhaps to E.ON or to British Gas because of the perpetrator's behaviour. There are grants available. All the big energy suppliers such as E.ON, British Gas, npower, Scottish Power, they have grants which you can apply to via an organisation called Charis Grants. You can apply online, explain your situation, and then they will decide whether or not they can cancel or reduce some of the arrears. Same with the Thames Water Trust. It very much depends really on your circumstances, and I think what time of year it is, because I think they get given a pot of money each year, and sometimes it can run out. But it's definitely worth applying for. So child maintenance. A lot of women have had some difficulties with child maintenance options, especially at the moment. With a lot of perpetrators are using coronavirus as an excuse not to pay. Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, and unfortunately, our CMS isn't challenging that. But I would, I've got the number at the end. Recommend considering it. You can call, say, if you have children and the other parent, the abuser, isn't contributing to their upbringing. It is definitely worth contacting child maintenance options. What they can do is, without starting any processes, they can discuss how much you're likely to get from the perpetrator, what the process would be, and if you explain right at the beginning that you've experienced abuse and it's not safe or appropriate for you to be making an arrangement directly with the perpetrator, then they shouldn't be pushing you down that route, which they often do. They can do it on your behalf. They can collect the money on your behalf, and they can waive the fee that they would usually charge to do that. So it's I could do a whole webinar, I think, about child maintenance, but as a first port of call, I'd recommend speaking to child maintenance options, and I've got the number at the end. And if anybody is using the job centre at the moment for claiming universal credit, there's this, not everybody's aware, but once you have been claiming for 3 months, you can get a half price travel discount card as well. So you have to ask for that in the actual job centre, and you just need a photo, and then that while you're still claiming benefits, you can use that for not just for getting to work related appointments, but in general. I think it gives half price bus and rail travel, but not tube. Bear with me, I'm just going to check if we've got any questions in the chat. So yeah, a question about child maintenance, and how can you make your ex pay child maintenance if the nature of their work is cash in hand? This is very difficult, and often I've known perpetrators to leave a well-paid job to take on cash in hand work, which was at their own detriment, just to spite the mother of their children and their children themselves, by not so they didn't have to pay child maintenance. I think they can CMS. I don't know if there is a lot they can do in that situation. To be honest, I know if there's evidence that he's working cash in hand, there's a possibility of reporting it. But to be honest, I'm not sure. But I can get back to you on that one by the Women's Trust. I'll just write that down. But I would recommend calling and explaining that he's working cash in hand, but you want, but you know he has money to pay child maintenance, and see what they advise. Yeah, and another comment that ex-partner is claiming all the benefits that he can, plus cash in hand. If you were claiming child maintenance, they can be deducted from his benefits, but a lot of women will have this process of weighing up whether it's worth it, the money they would get deducted from the benefits, which would be quite small. You know, on the when it might be a trigger for him to be to be abusive, to restart the abuse, or to escalate the abuse. And it's a difficult it's a difficult call to make. And yeah, another comment that ex-partner claiming all benefits plus cash in hand. So if he's claiming benefits on the basis of him not working and then claiming cash in hand, obviously he's committing benefit fraud, and it is something that you could consider reporting him for. It depends on whether you would feel safe to do that, whether the risk that it might pose to you would be worth would be worth doing that. I know perpetrators often don't hesitate to make fraudulent claims, allegations about the women we work with, claiming that they're working cash in hand when they're not, or even if they are, claiming that they're committing benefit fraud. So it seems very unfair for women not to be able to do the same. But it depends whether it's going to sort of compromise your safety or not. Let's look at one more question. Yeah, and you can report anonymously. It's true. Sometimes the perpetrator may put two and two together, but but see, they wouldn't be able to prove that it was yourself who made the complaint. And I know in the past, when perpetrators have made allegations about the women, the DWP are very quick to act. They're very quick to get in touch. So it should be the other way around as well. That if you made a complaint and anonymously, that they act on it quickly. And there is a number you can call to report benefit fraud. I don't have it on the presentation, unfortunately, but if you Google DWP or Job Centre benefit fraud, it should come up. Just a word about universal credit. I know it's probably the most widely used benefit now, and with many people losing their jobs because of COVID-19, it's the amount of people, in particular women, using has increased. So I just want to give a couple of bits of advice there about that. See, there is you're probably already aware that when you claim, you have to wait up to 5-6 weeks for the first payment, and obviously that's a huge amount of time if you already have no money. So there is the possibility of getting an advance payment. You can only do it once, so if you decide to go down that route, it's important to think about how much you need, because if you don't get enough, then you won't be able to get a second advance payment loan, and it is paid back. It's usually they'll deduct £10 a month from your ongoing benefit payments, and it is quite quick as well. Usually, if you apply for it, you'll get it the same day or the next day. If this can be useful for people who have perhaps just left, who have fled, so women who haven't been able to pay the rent or to sort of arrange for the household payments for a long time because they haven't been able to, they may, at that very stressful point of starting a new life, find it a bit difficult to start paying rent, to set up the direct payments to the landlord. So you can request what they call an APA, alternative payment arrangement, where the the job centre pay the rent directly to the landlord, if that's something that would be useful. Sometimes if a couple have a joint universal credit claim, you can apply for an alternative payment arrangement just to split that payment, so it's 50-50 to each partner. But obviously, if you're with somebody who's dangerous and who's abusive, they're going to know when that is put in place, because they're going to get 50% less benefit payment. So this was something the government put in place to help women who were suffering abuse, economic abuse in particular. But if it's used wrongly, it could in fact put her at more risk. It can be useful when, say, there's an issue where a couple are claiming together and one of the partners has a gambling addiction, for example, or just finds it very difficult to manage money. Sometimes they agree to split the payment, so at least one half of the payment is protected. Something that not a lot of people are aware of is domestic violence discretionary period. So if you are making a claim for universal credit and you've experienced domestic abuse recently, the last 6 months, you can ask to benefit from this. And this means that the usual things you would have to do that have been put on hold anyway at the moment because of COVID, such as showing that you're looking for jobs, filling in your journal, having appointments either face-to-face or online, are suspended. So you get 13 weeks not having to jump through those hoops and to go through that usual training. And that can be extended up to 26 weeks if you're the carer for children, or a child under 16. And I would, if you're making a claim and it's a claim in your own name, the perpetrator doesn't have has access to the claim of the online journal, to write in your journal that you've disclosed that you've experienced domestic abuse, so it's on record, and that the job centre can take that into account, when they're dealing with you and when they're dealing with the claim, and hopefully allow you to benefit from these measures. Bear with me a second while I check the chat. Okay, so I'd say our organisation is called Surviving Economic Abuse, and on our website we have some leaflets which we call our resources, which kind of goes into a bit more detail about the things that I've mentioned today. But because it's like a fairly short presentation, I've kind of skipped over a lot of things, because probably each and every slide I could talk about all day, really. So these are, if you go on the website, there's some leaflets here, some resources where we talk about sort of different areas, like what economic abuse is, signs to look out for, how you can support family and friends, the grants and financial help that I mentioned, advice on speaking to your bank, speaking to your mortgage provider, if that's an issue, speaking to, reporting to the police, and some specialist advice on coping during the pandemic as well, and during the change of circumstances that we're all living through. Bear in mind, bear with me, I think there's a question in the chat. So I've got a question about, so if you reported an ex-partner for benefit fraud, would you be safe? And it's difficult to say. I'm thinking, I was a domestic violence support worker before doing this, and if I imagine if it was a woman I was working with, I would weigh up quite a few things. If you're living sort of independently and perhaps he doesn't know where you live, he doesn't know your new address. You've got sort of a plan on how to keep safe. Maybe you're working with domestic abuse organisation that you can contact if things escalate. If he's not in contact with you, or any sort of family or friends who could give away your address, then then it sounds as though you've got that protection in place. And the DWP as well, if you report to them anonymously, see, they couldn't pass on your details, but it depends. So if you're in a situation where he knows where you live and there is contact there, and there's already danger, there's things that maybe just calm at the moment, but there's always a chance that something might trigger him to stop being abusive again, and to escalate that, and that he might sort of be looking for an excuse to use, then there is a chance that it could put you at risk. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, because obviously it's not fair the way that he's living, what he's doing. So it depends. It's a difficult one to weigh up, really. I would say it depends on where you are, and if he still has contact with you, and if he still has knowledge about where you live. And I think that's why it's good to, like, wherever you are, to have the details of local domestic abuse service as well, and the police too. So whatever is happening with our ex-partners means if somebody who hasn't been on the scene for a long time does come back, it's we know where to seek help immediately if the risk does escalate. So I've got a list here of organisations which can help. So at the top in red, I know there's been a few different questions which I can maybe give sort of general advice on, but it's hard to answer without going into what we would call a full debt advice appointment, where we take into account all the scenarios. I would suggest as a first port of call, ringing the financial support line, and this is a line which is run in partnership between Surviving Economic Abuse and Money Advice Plus, and I work there. I work on there 1 day a week, and I have other colleagues who we specialise really in advising women who have experienced economic abuse. And for a couple of the questions that have come up, it could be that when we get some more information, we might be able to give more concrete advice than I could give today. So I would recommend, if there's no answer, leave a message and we'll get back. And if it's not always safe for us to call, let us know when would be a good time to call or to not call. I've listed some other debt advice charities here, which are very good. I say Citizens Advice, Mary Ward for anyone based in London, Step Change and National Deadline. But I would advise the Financial Support Line as a first port of call, because the other organisations are generic. They will support anyone who has debt, whereas we offer specific support for survivors of economic abuse. At the bottom of the page is the two the grant bodies that I mentioned. So Charis grants to help with arrears with gas and electricity. Thames Sure Scheme, that's just for Thames Water. But if you Google if you're not with Thames Water, if you Google whoever your local sort of water supplier is, often they have a section on the website which says get help, vulnerable customers, what to do if you can't pay your bill, and often they have their own sort of grant scheme. Okay. So child maintenance options, for calling and discussing what could be done if an ex-partner isn't supporting the children. And I would recommend, if you call to clarify right away that the ex-partner is an abuser, because there is a tendency to encourage women to make their own arrangements with the ex-partner, but obviously it's not appropriate when there's abuse or coercion. And CFAS is the organisation that I mentioned, which offers extra security on your credit, so to prevent credit identity fraud either by the perpetrator or by anyone really. And the next three organisations: Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. So these are credit reference agencies, and this can be useful for women, because especially if you believe that your ex might have taken a loan out in your name, but you're not sure, or that he's taken out so many by coercing you can't quite remember everything that he's put in your name. So you can get access to your entire credit report by registering with one of these companies, and it will show you exactly what you owe and to who, and when the loan was taken out as well. So that can be useful just to get a picture, so there's hopefully no sort of nasty surprises, because often we find that after leaving perpetrators, then letters can turn up from creditors to who we didn't even know we owed money to, because the perpetrator has done it behind our backs. Yeah. And the other two, Financial Ombudsman, Communication Ombudsman Service. So if your bank isn't being helpful, or you have a situation I mentioned, perpetrators using their telephone to keep that control by forcing you to have an account into a mobile contract, and the phone company isn't cooperating, then I would recommend escalating a complaint to one of these organisations. Bear with me while I just check the chat. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problems, obviously, and about the whole process of being in a relationship with abuser and the aftermath of it. But I wanted to end on a more positive note, really, and speak about some of the women who work with us, who we refer to as the EEG group, Experts by Experience group. So these are women from all sorts of backgrounds who have experienced different types of economic abuse, mostly from an ex-male partner, and are now rebuilding their lives, and they're offering us their time and their expertise in discussing how to deal with this problem. And one woman in particular who experienced all types of abuse from her ex-partner has written a letter which she said that we could use when speaking with other survivors as well, about her experience of economic abuse and how she managed to rebuild her life after that. So I'm just going to read. It's quite a long letter, but I'm just going to read the main parts of it. So bear with me a second. So this is a survivor speaking. Life for me really began the day I thought it was over. In 2012, I opened my eyes to find myself laid in a hospital bed, surrounded by my family and police. For 5 years, I had suffered all forms of abuse. When I finally found the courage to end the relationship, my ex told me he was going to kill me. The next night, he assaulted me to the point of me needing reconstructive surgery. Saying my life began as I lay in a hospital bed may be a strange concept, but at the time I didn't know it myself. But looking back that day, I had a choice to carry on existing or start living, and I chose to live. And it wasn't until I lay there that I finally heard the words domestic abuse. Up to that point, I'd never even heard of it. Regardless of whether it would have changed anything for me, educating people about domestic abuse is imperative, and it can save lives. The more I learned about abuse, the more I wanted to do to help others. So I started doing work with various charities to raise awareness. I turned my negative into a positive. I had a beautiful child, and I was determined I could do all I could to ensure his life was happy. Dealing with physical and emotional abuse was, of course, very difficult and took time. But during this time, something else started catching up with me: the financial abuse. During the relationship, my ex knew the PIN numbers to my bank accounts and would regularly steal money from me. He wouldn't give me any money towards living expenses, and made me get loans and store cards in my name. Every now and then he would buy me gifts. These gifts were then used against me, and every time I asked for help with the bills or questioned him about him taking money from me, I would be told I was ungrateful. I didn't ask for these presents or even want them. I just wanted to be able to provide for my child. I remember days I would search the house for spare change just to be able to feed him. On top of this, I was dealing with physical and emotional abuse, so the debts I had were pushed to the back of my mind. What I think it's important for people to understand is that to everyone else, there was no obvious signs this was happening. I was well dressed, as was my son. I became very good at hiding the abuse. Unfortunately, society seems to have a stereotypical view of what they think a victim should or shouldn't look like, and this misconception can further imprison a victim. Because of the attack and ongoing issues, I moved address. One day, having been there for some time, I received a debt letter. Because I had been dealing with mental and physical recovery, I hadn't even begun to think of debt. I then started receiving more debt letters demanding the money from me and threatening court action. I would break down. I barely had any money to feed myself and my son. I was trying to recover and protect my child from ongoing issues. How could I possibly be able to pay back this debt? So I would contact the companies and explain the situation. I'd cry and beg them to help, but was told there was nothing that could be done. The debt was in my name, so therefore I was responsible for it. I felt helpless and alone. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to, so all I could do was ignore the letters. But over time they built up, and I decided I needed to face the debt and find a way to pay it back. Although it was a hard pill to swallow, I accepted it wouldn't go away unless I did something about it. So I finally reached out to someone I knew, and they recommended a debt charity to me called Step Change. The people I spoke to were extremely understanding and helpful, and through them I started paying the debt back each month. That was a real turning point for me. Although the debt was a result of financial abuse, accepting the reality of the situation gave me back some control over my life. For 7 years I paid it off and resigned myself to the fact I would be in debt for the next 16 years. But doing the work I do, I was determined to find a way to help others and make changes where financial abuse is concerned. So I started doing some research, and that's when I came across the charity Surviving Economic Abuse. After a talk with someone from the charity, they gave me details of a project. The people running the project worked with me to build up as much information and evidence from my case and contact the creditors to request a write-off. This was a success, and after years of paying off the debt, I am now officially debt-free, and it feels amazing. I can finally start to rebuild my life knowing I don't have debt hanging over me. Another major point for me during my recovery was when I decided I wanted to take control over my life and my finances, so nobody could ever control us again. Financially, I still have to be careful with money. I don't live beyond my means, and I stick to a strict budget. After the incident, I was diagnosed with PTSD, so my mental health needs to be a priority. I found that physical exercise has been amazing for me, so I go to the gym regularly. Finding something you enjoy doing that has a positive effect on you is extremely beneficial, and I recommend it to anyone who is struggling with their mental health. I'm finally in a position in my life in which my bills are paid on time and I have money to buy food, and it is a great feeling to finally be able to do that. Financial freedom for me isn't about being able to buy nice things, it's about being in control of my money, being able to live the life I choose to. There have been times when I wanted to leave where I was living, even for a short while when I was with the perpetrator, but I couldn't because of my financial situation. So financial freedom for a victim survivor can protect them and give them security. What I would like to stress is that my advice comes from years of recovery. It doesn't happen overnight, and something I have found is very important is to accept the bad days. There are going to be days where you struggle, but by allowing these days and accepting them, you don't battle against it. When I accept my bad days, I feel more in control. I tell myself I'm not going to feel like this forever, and tomorrow will be a new day and I can start again. My life is now how I chose it to be. I surround myself with the right people and positive things. And although I have mastered the art of self-soothing, I do reach out to people close to me when I have a down day. I don't want them to fix me or try to heal me. I just want them to listen and understand. And that within itself helps. One of the most valuable things I've learned throughout my journey is that happiness is within you. And there are people in my life that bring joy to my world. For example, my beautiful son. and I see these people as blessings, but I do not rely on them for my happiness. Genuine happiness comes from making yourself happy. It is truly free when you discover this and learn how to do it. When you learn how to make your own happiness and create a life for yourself in which others cannot affect their happiness, you are free and you can live the life you want to live. And I know these things are easier said than done, and as I explained, my journey has been very long, and I had to trust in the process and have a belief that things would get better. I believe that we always have two options when things get tough: to carry on existing or to start living. And I choose to live. And I promise you that once you make that choice, things can and will get better. And I just wanted to share that because the woman who wrote it was in, perhaps, I think it was about £16,000 worth of debt, and it really did seem that there was actually no way out, and this would be that link with the perpetrator, the financial burden he'd placed on her, and the psychological effect that had would be with her forever. But now she started her own business. She started acting as well, and said that she can reassure us that it is, recovery is possible, and rebuilding life is possible, and that there are practical steps out there we can do, which may seem like quite small things, like speaking with the bank, sorting out a debt, but they're all sort of steps that can help empower and break links one by one with with the next partner. Thanks very much for joining. And in the past we would have done this face to face, perhaps in as a group session. So thank you for adapting to this new way of doing things, and having your patience with the slowness of the presentation and the computer issues that crop up. And just take care. And it's very, very glad you could be here.